Russia's 1,000-kilometer Crimea land bridge has been cut. This critical supply line, stretching from Taganrog to Jangoy, has been severed by Ukrainian forces without a single tank advance or the capture of a single town. Instead, the operation relies entirely on drones, marking a significant shift in modern warfare tactics. This road was Russia's only high-capacity land corridor to Crimea. Fuel was transported through here, ammunition moved through here, troops were transferred through here, and now this corridor has turned into a high-risk area closed to traffic. The Kerch Bridge is damaged, railway ferries are sunk, there are no regular sailings in the Black Sea, and the last remaining land route has been cut. Crimea is effectively turning into an island. And Russia's own military bloggers accept this. The total liberation of Crimea may have begun, and the most critical move of this strategy is how that 1,000-kilometer land bridge was cut. To grasp the scale of this development, let's first look at what the M14 means for Russia. Because what has been lost is not an ordinary highway. The M14 highway runs along the coast of the Sea of Azov, starting from Taganrog and reaching Crimea's northern gate, Jangoy, via Mariupol, Berdyansk, Milat, and Henichesk. It is approximately 1,000 kilometers long, and this road was the main artery through which everything flowing to the territories Russia has occupied since 2022 and to Crimea passed. Fuel was transported on this road. Ammunition moved through this corridor. Air defense spare parts were distributed along this line. Troop transfers were conducted on this route, and a significant portion of the civilian population's energy, water, and food needs in Crimea also depended on this highway. This level of reliance on a single exposed land route for both military and civilian logistics is highly unusual for a major power, especially after 4 years of conflict. It highlights a strategic vulnerability that Russia failed to adequately diversify, contrasting sharply with historical military doctrines emphasizing redundant supply lines. So does Russia have no other options to reach Crimea? To understand the answer to this question, we need to know why Russia was so dependent on this corridor. When it annexed Crimea in 2014, Russia's only connection to the peninsula was ferries across the Kerch Strait, an inadequate and slow solution. To address this problem, the Kerch Bridge was opened in 2018. President Putin personally sat behind the wheel of a truck, but the bridge always remained a bottleneck. With the 2022 invasion, Russia gained a brand new route, a land corridor through occupied Ukrainian territory. The M14 was the backbone of this corridor, and Moscow tried to strengthen, expand, and protect this road for 4 years. Because the key to holding Crimea was this road, it appears the answer is increasingly clear. Nearly all alternatives have been exhausted. The Kerch Bridge has been unable to handle heavy cargo traffic since the Ukrainian attacks of 2022 and 2023. The bridge's railway line operates with restrictions, while the road section functions with weight limitations. All Kerch railway ferries are sunk. Russian ships in the Black Sea cannot make regular sailings due to Ukrainian sea drone and missile threats. A reliable maritime connection with Sevastopol appears to no longer exist, and aircraft cannot sustain large-scale air resupply because Crimean airspace is under constant risk. So the M14 was not just a highway, it was Crimea's de facto lifeline. And now that lifeline has been cut. Of course, Ukraine did not reach this point overnight. For 4 years, the Ukrainian Armed Forces watched this route, tracked how the Russians built and strengthened the highway, mapped their logistics patterns, and developed drone capacity step by step. They recorded every supply point, every fuel depot, every convoy route, and now the command order appears to have been given. Drone pilots have begun striking this corridor systematically. Ukrainian military analyst Mikhailo Roza explained the strategic logic of this operation. Quote, "The beginning has been made. Drone operations are being expanded and developed. The next phase is to establish a drone control zone along the Sea of Azov coast, and Crimea's supply lifeline can be effectively cut." End quote. The Azov Brigade published footage of drone strikes on Russian military vehicles near Mariupol. In the footage, fuel tankers are burning, military trucks are exploding, and convoys are scattering on the highway. And these images show not just a military success, but the fruit of 4 years of patient preparation. Pro-war blogger Vladimir Romanov personally traveled the route and shared his impressions. Quote, "You saw in the video it was a used road. Absolutely used, but now it depends on the enemy's progress. The enemy cuts the roads." End quote. Another prominent military blogger, Alexei Jivi, expressed the situation even more starkly. Quote, "This is an extremely alarming signal for military and civilian logistics. Ukraine is reaching 200-kilometer depth with Starlink-supported long-range drones." End quote. These confessions come not from Ukrainian analysts or Western think tanks, but from Russia's own pro-war bloggers. And this reveals the severity of the situation more clearly than anything else. The candid admissions from pro-Kremlin military bloggers are particularly telling, as they often serve as a barometer for the true sentiment within Russia's military circles, often diverging from official state media narratives. Their direct experience on the ground provides an unfiltered, critical assessment that is rarely seen in such conflicts. So how is Ukraine cutting this highway without physically controlling it? The answer lies in one of the most striking transformations of modern warfare. The M14 sits 160 to 200 kilometers behind the front line, in what would traditionally be considered the deep rear zone. Normally, this distance is accepted as the area where an army can safely operate its logistics lines. But Ukraine's long-range FPV drones and Baba Yaga type large kamikaze unmanned aerial vehicles may have completely disproved this assumption. The logic of the operation is extremely simple, but its effect is devastating. Drones patrol continuously along the highway. They conduct real-time targeting through the Starlink satellite network. When a moving military truck, fuel tanker, or armored vehicle is detected, a drone reaches the target within minutes. The military term for this tactic is interdiction fire, but it is being done with drones instead of traditional artillery or air forces. And drones' advantage is far greater than artillery. They can patrol continuously, confirm targets visually, deliver maximum damage at minimum cost, and most importantly, do not risk their pilot. Baba Yaga type large kamikaze drones are the heavy weapon of this operation. These drones can carry dozens of kilograms of explosives and destroy a fuel tanker or ammunition truck in a single sortie. Smaller FPV drones serve as hunters, fast, agile, and cheap. When the two work together, the FPV detects the target. Baba Yaga strikes. This entire coordination is managed in real time via Starlink satellite connection. Why Russia has been unable to mount an effective defense against this threat is a separate question. Expensive air defense systems like S-400 and Pantsir cannot operate efficiently against cheap drone swarms. A Pantsir missile costs thousands of dollars, while the drone it targets may cost a few hundred. Every time a drone is shot down, Russia spends thousands, but Ukraine immediately sends a new one. This cost asymmetry is eroding Russia's defense budget, while Ukraine's attack capacity grows every day. Russia tried switching to night convoys, but Ukraine's thermal imaging capability renders night operations ineffective as well. Darkness can no longer hide Russian convoys. And here there is a very critical technological dimension. Ukrainian drones now operate with artificial intelligence integration. Russian electronic warfare systems conduct signal jamming, but AI-supported drones can reach the target based on preloaded coordinates even when the signal is cut. Russia's traditional electronic warfare doctrine is becoming increasingly ineffective against this new generation of drones. The integration of artificial intelligence into drone navigation, allowing operations even under signal jamming, represents a significant leap in drone warfare. This capability fundamentally challenges established electronic warfare strategies, forcing a re-evaluation of defensive measures that traditionally relied on disrupting communication links. Russia's most popular military blogger, Rybar, with millions of followers, summarized the situation. Quote, "No more mechanized tank attacks. Ukraine's long-range drone strikes cannot be stopped because Russia does not have sufficient air defense systems. And even if Russians manage to advance in the war, it changes nothing." End quote. This last sentence is particularly noteworthy because the few kilometers gained at the front lose all meaning if the logistics line behind has been cut. Thus, a paradoxical picture emerges. Russia can advance at the front, but the further it advances, the longer its supply lines become, and the more exposed they are to drone threats. Ukraine, even if it retreats, harasses Russia's logistics with its drones, ensuring that any advance carries no strategic value. This is the purest form of a war of attrition, and Ukraine may be winning this war with drones. To grasp the true meaning of the M14 coming under fire control, it is enough to look at Crimea's other connections, because all of them are either damaged or unusable. The Kerch Bridge, the symbol of the Russia-Crimea bond that Putin opened with a grand ceremony in 2018, has been unable to operate at full capacity since the 2022 truck bomb and the 2023 sea drone attack. Heavy military vehicles and tanks cannot cross. The railway line operates with restrictions. And given the continuous development of Ukraine's ballistic missile capability, the bridge continues to be a long-term target. Hits on the radars of the S-500 systems protecting Crimea have even been recorded. The sea route is not safe either. Ukraine's sea drones have effectively expelled the Black Sea Fleet from Sevastopol. The flagship Moskva is sunk. Dozens of ships are damaged or redeployed. Civilian ferries try to cross via Kerch with military cargo, but capacity is extremely limited, and Ukrainian sea drones also threaten this route. The air route is already effectively closed. Crimean airspace is under constant Ukrainian missile and drone threat. Sustaining large-scale military air resupply is both expensive and extremely risky. Vadim Ryabo summarized this picture with a very striking metaphor. Quote, "The land bridge is collapsing. Ground forces don't need to physically reach the M14. Ukraine has established fire control. Baba Yaga and long-range FPV drones are hunting Russian convoys in real time. If you can't transport fuel or ammunition, you cannot hold territory. We are watching Crimea's de facto islandization in real time." End quote. This term islandization is extremely significant because although Crimea is physically a peninsula, the severing of its connections is turning it strategically into an island. And resupplying an island, especially one with hundreds of thousands of soldiers and millions of civilians, is an extremely difficult and expensive operation. Crimea's water needs have been a chronic problem since 2014. The peninsula experienced severe water shortages after Ukraine shut the North Crimea Canal. Russia reopened the canal in 2022, but the canal itself is within Ukraine's strike range. Energy infrastructure is also dependent on the land corridor. A significant portion of natural gas and electricity transmission lines follow the M14 route. A significant share of food supply also comes via this highway. So the cutting of the M14 may mean not just the collapse of military resupply, but of civilian life as well. Crimea's occupation economy is already contracting. Tourism revenue is falling. Agricultural production is restricted by sanctions, and skilled workers are leaving the peninsula. Supply disruptions could dramatically accelerate this trend. The risk of inflation and basic needs shortages in occupied territories rises every week. And this is a process that erodes Russia's political claims over Crimea from within. Ukraine is now applying the same strategic logic, but using hundreds of small drones instead of bombers. Cost thousands of times lower, effect comparable. Russia's difference is far more critical. The M14 has no real alternative. The Kerch Bridge is insufficient, the sea route dangerous, the air route expensive. All gates to Crimea are closing one by one. The cutting of the land corridor is also directly affecting the Black Sea Fleet's operational capacity. The fuel and ammunition flow to support fleet operations was provided via the M14. When this flow is cut, the fleet, already displaced from Sevastopol and with restricted mobility, weakens further. Russia's claim to Black Sea dominance may be collapsing simultaneously from the sea via Ukrainian sea drones and from the land via the M14 drone blockade. The process that began with the sinking of the flagship Moskva is now being completed in its logistics dimension, and this logistics collapse coincides with a period when Russia is also receiving bad news at the front. According to data from the Institute for the Study of War, Russia's expected spring offensive ended in fiasco. In April 2026, Russian forces experienced their first net territory loss since August 2024, when Ukraine captured territory in Russia's Kursk Oblast. Behind this retreat are several factors: Ukrainian ground counter-offensives and medium-range strikes, the end of Russia's illegal use of Starlink terminals in Ukraine, and the Kremlin's paranoid restriction of the Telegram messaging application. This last point is particularly noteworthy. Russia is restricting its own communications infrastructure with its own hands. Telegram had become the primary tool for military coordination in Russia. Frontline units received orders, maps, and intelligence through this platform. The Kremlin's restriction of access due to internal security paranoia may have disrupted unit coordination. While the advantage Starlink provided on the Ukrainian side was being eliminated, their own soldiers' communication tool was being taken away. This is a strategic contradiction with concrete consequences at the front. And the supervision of Starlink terminals that Russia had been using illegally is also a separate blow. Russian units were benefiting from Ukraine's own communications infrastructure by using Starlink at the front. SpaceX's deactivation of these terminals may have reduced Russian commander real-time intelligence capacity significantly. Thus, Russia lost two communication sources simultaneously. It restricted its own Telegram itself and could no longer use the enemy's Starlink. When an army loses both its communication tool and its supply line is cut, what remains is not a force capable of fighting, but a structure beginning to dissolve. And the direct military consequences of cutting the M14 are very concrete. Russia's main force in the south, the 58th Combined Arms Army, is dependent on this highway. If ammunition transfer slows, firepower at the front drops. If fuel shipments begin to falter, armored vehicles cannot move. If air defense spare parts cannot reach their destination, Defense against Ukraine's drone and missile attacks weakens, which creates a vicious cycle, enabling more drones to reach deeper. Russia spends more resources every day, while protecting the corridor becomes increasingly expensive and more unsuccessful. It appears that Ukraine has consciously designed this vicious cycle. Strike the supply line with drones. Let the disrupted supply weaken air defense. And with weakened air defense, let more drones reach deeper. Each stage feeds the next, and the most elegant dimension of this strategy is its cost. Ukraine is paralyzing Russia's billion-dollar logistics infrastructure, with drones costing a few hundred. Every destroyed fuel tanker erodes Russia's petroleum reserves. Every struck ammunition truck reduces firepower at the front, and every destroyed air defense convoy opens the way for the next drone wave. Crimea itself may also be directly feeling this pressure. The peninsula's tourism and agriculture sectors could collapse without reliable resupply. Energy and water infrastructure is being affected by supply disruptions. And for civilians living in occupied territories, the risk of shortages and inflation rises every day. Russia's Crimea is ours rhetoric is no longer a claim of victory. It is becoming a logistics nightmare. Rybar's confession is perhaps the most striking point of this analysis. Quote, "Even if Russians manage to advance in the war, it changes nothing." End quote. This sentence comes from Russia's most popular military blogger, a Kremlin-connected figure with millions of followers. And what he says confirms one of military strategy's most fundamental principles. Without logistics, you cannot hold territory. From Alexander the Great to Napoleon, from Napoleon to Rommel, every great commander in history faced the same lesson. No matter how brilliant a tactician you are, when the supply line behind is cut, not advancing but even staying standing becomes difficult. And the impact of these confessions on the Russian public should not be underestimated. Names like Jivy, Romanov, and Rybar saying alarming signal and changes nothing is undermining the Kremlin's everything is under control narrative from within. While official media announces victories, their own war correspondents say it cannot be stopped. This contradiction may be creating distrust in Russian society and deepening war fatigue. So what could happen next? Ukraine's next phase appears quite clear, establishing a permanent drone control zone along the Sea of Azov coast. Currently, operations are concentrated in certain sections, but as the drone fleet expands, this fire control could spread to the entirety of the M14, and when that happens, safe resupply to Crimea by land could end completely. Russia's countermove appears extremely limited. It could try to build alternative land routes, but these roads would also be open to drone threats and could already be hit during construction. It could pile air defense onto this route, but every system pulled from the front and other regions leaves somewhere else exposed. It could switch to night convoys, but Ukraine's thermal imaging capability renders night operations ineffective as well. And the scenario of completely isolating two-thirds of occupied territories is no longer a distant possibility. It is a current development. Analysts note that if the M14 becomes completely unusable and the Kerch Bridge is taken out of service, all of Russia's military presence in the south would be unsustainable. These two lines, the land corridor and the bridge, are Russia's last two lifelines in the south, and Ukraine is systematically striking both. The risk for the Kerch Bridge grows every month. Ukraine's ballistic missile and sea drone capability is continuously developing. A new accurate hit on the bridge's damaged structure could halt all traffic. And with the M14 already under drone control, the bridge's closure would completely isolate Crimea. No reliable resupply by land, sea, or air would remain. The Ukrainian General Staff appears aware of this situation and may be defining its strategy as a hybrid blockade. Cut the land route with drones, threaten the bridge with missiles, close the sea route with sea drones. Simultaneous pressure from three fronts, and none of them requiring a major ground offensive. The international dimension of this development is also extremely important. What Ukraine has achieved with drones is inspiring NATO countries to rethink their asymmetric warfare strategies, collapsing billion-dollar logistics infrastructure with drones costing a few hundred. This is a case study shaping the future of the defense industry, a living proof of how small states can be effective against large armies. And Ukraine is both the author and the practitioner of this study. Russia built, strengthened, and tried to protect the land corridor to Crimea for 4 years. Ukraine watched, prepared, and waited for 4 years. And now it may have cut that corridor with drones costing a few hundred. The M14 is no longer a safe supply line. It has turned into a corridor hunted by Ukrainian drones. The Kerch Bridge cannot operate at full capacity. The sea route is dangerous. The air route is expensive and risky. All of Crimea's gates are closing one by one. And Russia's own military bloggers accept the truth. Even if we advance, nothing changes. Because if you cannot transport fuel, tanks stop. If you cannot deliver ammunition, guns fall silent. And if your supply line is cut, you cannot hold territory. Ukraine besieged Crimea without crossing the front line, without capturing a single town. And this siege tightens a little more each day because Ukraine is expanding its drone fleet. Operational experience is accumulating, and Russia's countermoves fall one step behind every time. The rules of modern warfare are being rewritten, and the ones writing these rules are Ukraine's drone pilots.